Toni Morrison was both a Pulitzer and a Nobel Prize winning novelist, among all manner of other awards and accolades. She also wrote plays and books for children and was an all-around inspirational figure. I've gathered some of her thoughts and quotes about writing, so let's start at the beginning before we've even written a word. I tell my students one of the most important things they need to know is when they're at their best creatively. They need to ask themselves, what do I need in order to release my imagination? She's talking here about your actual writing space, the physical place that you occupy when you're doing your creative work. I don't often see authors talking about this, and that's probably because it varies so wildly between authors. But I definitely agree with what she's saying here. I think to be at your best creatively, it really does help to be somewhere where you feel comfortable and safe and productive. I think it's important to balance things though, because you can't always control every aspect of your space. I think if you reached a position where you're unable to write a single word if conditions aren't perfect, then you've probably gone too far and you need to roll it back a little bit. Sometimes this occurs to me. I listen to instrumental music most of the time while I write, and sometimes if I can't find the right playlist or I'm bored of the ones I've got, I think, oh, this is going to be a pain, I'm not going to get anything done. It's harder to write. But then when I get going in perfect silence, it's fine, and I work as well as I ever do. So as much as this is about a physical location, I think a lot of it is actually mental as well. By all means, if you can provide yourself with a comfortable space for writing and you feel productive and you enjoy working there, absolutely go for that. But remember, at the end of the day, you don't have to depend on that. I've written novels at home, at my desk, in bed, on public transport, on a laptop, in work, on breaks, on a laptop. You can work anywhere, I definitely believe that. But I also believe there is an advantage to dropping straight into an environment that's already perfectly set up for you to be productive and to enjoy your time writing. Everything I see or do, the weather and the water, buildings, everything actual is an advantage when I'm writing. It's like a menu or a giant toolbox, and I can pick and choose what I want. I've covered a lot of authors in this series, and it's funny just how many of them mention this exact same concept, but they all have a slightly different approach to it. Haruki Murakami calls it a garage, Neil Gaiman calls it his compost heap, but whatever the case, it's a place where you gather all of these ideas from your daily life that influence your writing, little moments that you want to take away and put into a story somewhere. And trust me, you might feel like your life is really mundane and nothing interesting ever happens that might influence a story, and you don't want to hear something someone says in work and think that you want to ever put that into a novel that you're writing, but just be a little more open to it. And it's not because those things are super exciting and deserve a place in your book, but it's just that sometimes people say things or do things that you would never have thought up. The truth really can be stranger than fiction. And I think if you drop one of those into your stories every now and again, it just helps to make your world feel alive and real and authentic. And I think that's something that always goes down well with readers. It definitely does for me while I'm reading. The only thing I can really add to this concept is to encourage you to capture those moments as quickly as you can. The way somebody says something, or what they say, or how the light catches something, although it can really stand out to you at that moment, and you might even write it down, if you come back to it in a week's time, there's no guarantee that that magic will still be there. You might, as I often do, end up with a note that says rain cloud or how he walked in, and you're like, what the hell does that even mean? There's no magic to it. I can't even discern what I was talking about. So the way I like to do things is to make that note, absolutely, but before the day is done, expand it a little, make it into a moment, even if it has no story, has no plot or even a character, just write a few lines about something. And I've been so frustrated by the amount of these little moments that I've lost that I've actually come up with a system for myself to stop it from happening. I went to the trouble of designing a notepad for myself that doesn't just record the tiny idea, but also allows me to expand it a little bit and also link it easily with other things that might relate to the same story or the same concept. I used Amazon's KDP thing to make it into an actual physical notebook that then I could order a proof of just so that I can use it. First, I have an index of story ideas, and no matter whether that's a snippet or a character or a plot point, whatever, I can write it here. That helps me refer back to them when I need to. The rest of the book's made up of what I call snippets. So that could be an idea, a character, a scene, so on, so on. And I've also got a chance to write down which project or story that they link into and what kind of story that is. But the notes bit is the most important here. Here is where I will expand from the one sentence or the one phrase into an actual moment that I can then carry forward. Something that captures that magic that I feel in the initial, time when I'm noticing this, and then I can expand it later. There's also a little storyboard there if I want to draw out a scene instead of writing something longer. Then at the bottom, I can note what project that this story might already be linked to. So if it's an idea I've already had but I haven't finished yet, I can write the name of that. And I can also click whether I've used the idea or not. That way, for example, if it's my novel, if it's Project Ventus, something relating to that, I can flick back to the index and I can see wherever I've mentioned Project Ventus. I can go through and look at all of those ideas as one thing. It's a little bit extra to design all of that just so that I won't lose ideas anymore, but it's a system that really has been working for me so far. I just got sick of my notes app on my phone just being clogged with random words that didn't mean anything to me, and then thinking about an idea or having an idea come back to me at a later date and thinking I had something for that, where is it, and not being able to find it. Now, because that's a more organised and structured system for note-taking, I've managed to be a lot more productive and not lose as many ideas, which is great. That was an awfully long-winded way to say record your ideas and make them into a story as quickly as you possibly can. About minor characters, she said, I don't describe them very much, just broad strokes. You don't know exactly how tall they are because I don't want to force the reader into seeing what I see. If you've been around my channel for a while, you might know that this is speaking my language. This is pretty much my philosophy towards character description in general, not just secondary characters. And I know a lot of people will disagree and they'll want their characters to be described. That's absolutely fine. It just doesn't do anything for me. The reason why is because my focus when I'm writing stories is always trying to communicate something, even pass across an emotion or a feeling or a spark of something to a reader. And I often find that the shape of a character's nose has no real bearing on that for me. And there's absolutely a case for saying how a character looks is part of their character and it's going to make a reader feel one way or another about them. I absolutely agree. There is. I just can't do it and I don't enjoy reading it. I've said this before, but I tend to skim over character descriptions in general because they don't really put an image into my head anyway. It's just the way my mind works. Also, I find it's a regular occurrence for me to find male authors have described female characters a lot differently to how they describe their male characters, and I find that really frustrating. I've mentioned that before, and we've probably all seen the memes about how, the character breasted boobily down the stairs, and funny as that is, it is indicative of a wider problem that's just really frustrating when I see it. So that's another reason I just don't engage with character description in a physical way. It's not a huge part of it, but it is another contributing factor to why character description just doesn't really work for me. Though it absolutely might for you, and it does for millions, literally millions of readers. So this is purely a preference thing, and I think Toni Morrison is expressing her preference in the same way I am, but that doesn't mean she's right and you're wrong if you like character description. I'm not saying that. If you want to describe every aspect of your character's appearance because they wear something really cool or they look a particular way, which represents their character in some way, absolutely go for that. If you have the creativity for it, I commend you. I don't. So I tend to avoid it and I don't engage too much of it when I'm reading, but this is purely a preference-based one, I think. There's a line between revision and fretting, just working it to death. It's important to know when you're fretting it. When you're fretting it because it's not working, it needs to be scrapped. This is a really important point about something that's probably one of the hardest aspects of writing, and that's knowing when you're finished. I've finished at least the first draft of 8 different novels and I don't know how many works of short fiction, and I can tell you how many times I felt like a story is completely finished. 0. I always feel like there's more I could add to a story or something I could take away again, or I could do another pass at editing and change how this is worded or that. It goes on forever. You never get to a point where you feel like everything is done, it's perfect and ready to go, or at least I don't. However, I have noticed a difference between needing to work on something and needing to make a story better or to make a story work properly and adding finishing flourishes. It's happening to me right now with Project Ventus, which is my book that I'm working on now. It's absolutely finished. The main bulk of it is finished. I'm happy with it. I like the way the story flows. I'm happy enough with the plot and all of that stuff. There's nothing that needs major reworking. However, I can sit and tinker with the wording all day long. It's finishing flourishes that I'm working on, and I'm just trying to squeeze every little last bit of value out of it and make all the writing perfect and nice, which is impossible. However, with previous novels, I've got to this point, but something still hasn't felt right, and that to me is a lot different. If you feel like something's good, you just need to make it absolutely perfect, that's one thing. But if you finish something and think, this doesn't feel anywhere near finished, or this doesn't work at all, then that is entirely a different thing. What Toni Morrison is saying here is that if you're fretting because something's not working, then the project needs to be scrapped. And harsh as though that may sound, and she actually has a fair bit of harsh kind of real writing advice, but sometimes that's what you need. For the most part, she's right. I've definitely had projects that I've felt weren't working and tinkered with for too long because something fundamentally was broken about them that couldn't be repaired. The thing to remember is that even if you find yourself fretting over a story because it's not working and you think you do probably need to scrap it, try not to look at that as a defeat or a waste of time or a loss of something. Because to me, you've just figured out something that doesn't work that you can then improve or build on. Every word that you put down with your writing is experience that you've gained, and that's how I try to look at it. Even if I scrap a project, I'm not really losing anything. Though I admit that's a pretty bitter pill to swallow when we're talking about a 100,000 word novel, and I've been there several times. That's why I've got 8 finished novel drafts and only 1 or 2 I actually tried to do anything with. It also depends how many drafts you've been through and how much work you've put into it and how long you've been working on it, because if a first draft doesn't feel like something's working, then that doesn't necessarily mean you have to scrap it. It just might mean you need to rework it and just find the way through if you lost your way somewhere. But if you're on the 5th draft of a story and you still can't make it work, then maybe there's a bigger issue. So if you're at the end of a story right now, just have a think about how you really feel about it. Are you adding stuff to perfect it, or are you frantically trying to fix it and make it work? It's a valid point to think about, I think. As a writer, a failure is just information. It's something that I've done wrong in writing or is inaccurate or unclear. It's data. It's information, knowledge of what does not work. This is absolutely speaking my language. This is definitely my philosophy when it comes to writing. For fear of repeating myself, you're never wasting time from writing, even if what you finish doesn't end up coming to anything. There's a concept and a figure that comes to my mind here that I've heard a few times before, but it's basically that you need to write 1,000,000 words before you get good at writing. And that might seem like a hell of a figure, and it is, to be honest, but once you write a novel or two, you start to think, yeah, I could see how this would be attainable. I could see getting there. And you might be on your very first novel or just your first few stories, and you might think, have I got to write another 1,000,000 words before any of this is any good or any of this is any use? Definitely not. First of all, the figure's going to be different from everybody else. Everybody learns at different speeds and paces, so you might develop way quicker than, 1,000,000 words person. Or you might take 10 million words to get really good at something. It might be really demotivating, especially if you're brand new to writing, to think that everything you're writing now isn't going to be worth anything. There's no chance of being good. But that isn't really how it works for me. Well, as long as you're working on your craft and you're chasing down opportunities to develop and get better, you've every chance of writing something good and something that matters. And that's what writing is all about for me. It's art. It's about expressing something that you feel and you want others to feel. And you can absolutely do that without being a master of writing. But it's just common sense that the more time you spend doing something, the better you'll get at it. The more words you put down and the more hours you spend writing, the more you'll develop and get better. But if I could take one piece of writing experience and put it into the heads of any new writer I came across, it's that nothing you ever write is a waste of time. And you really do learn something from every single project that you finish or every single project that you work on. Every single word that you put down gets you closer to where you want to be. So don't be discouraged by the fact that at some point in the future you'll be a way better writer than you are now. Be motivated by that. The things that are causing you trouble right now, they won't forever. The things that you find really hard will get easier, and the stories that you write will get better, and you'll be really proud of them. I've been doing this a long time now, and I'm still really proud of all of my early writing, because if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have got to the point where I am now, where I feel like I'm better at it. Not perfect, not fantastic, but better at it. Suffice to say, I definitely agree with this approach from Toni Morrison. I definitely agree with most of what she said and most of what I've read about her opinions and her approaches to writing. If you're curious about what else you can learn from famous authors and their advice, try this video next. It's 4.5 hours long. It's a compilation of all of these videos that I've made, and you can skip through to find your favourite author. As always, thank you so much for watching, and happy writing.